Hey everyone, let's talk about insider risk. Now, insider risk is notoriously hard to detect because it's really difficult to tell what's normal or slightly abnormal behavior, but completely benign, and what's an actual risk. So what's the difference between, at the end of a quarter, somebody downloading a whole bunch of sensitive files because they need to do quarterly reports versus downloading a whole bunch of sensitive files because they want to steal that data right before they leave to another company? It's really hard to tell the difference. By some estimates, it does cost up to $17 million per company annually. So it's a very impactful, very challenging problem to solve. Typically, insider risk falls into three different categories. Either it's the careless user. This is an example of this is when, in Toyota's case, they had a developer or contractor who grabbed a bunch of code and posted it on GitHub. They think that this was unintentional, that they were trying to either show off their work or something like that. There wasn't malicious intent, but it exposed a whole bunch of sensitive code as well as some credentials. And nearly 300,000 customers were impacted. Then the next one is the malicious insider. So this is an employee or a contractor, so truly an insider who has actual malicious intent. So an example of this was there was a Houston contractor at a garbage company who was upset and decided to, as on their way out, reset 2,500 passwords across the US operations of this company. And by some estimates, made $860,000 in damage. So this is a malicious insider. And then there's the compromised identity. Now, this one is less so an insider risk, but still falls in that category. It's more of an insider who has been popped and that had taken over and actually been abused. Their credentials have been abused. So an example of this is an attacker grabs SSO credentials and looks just like a legitimate user, but does things like exfiltrate sensitive data from GitHub or starts a crypto miner or something like that. So all of these are insider risks that can be very challenging to detect. By some guesses, and studies out there think that 75% of insider risks are non-malicious. So those outside two are the more common. Fewer of them are like that Houston contractor who actually has malintent. Most likely it's either you do something by accident or you do something or your credentials were popped. So that makes it even harder to detect. And traditional tools like SIEMs and UEBAs face an impossible trade-off. Either you flag everything and your soups are sensitive, you would pick up things, but analysts would drown in the noise and would not be valuable. Or you tune it down to where it only finds the absolute crazy, abuse of insider behavior, and that is overtuned, so then you miss a lot of actual insider risk. What Exaforce has done is we've actually struck that balance. So we've found a way to be able to flag most activity that could be considered insider risk, and with our automatic triaging that we do, it reduces the noise and the burden on the analyst. And so they're only seeing true risks. And so that combination makes it so you can detect far more things and do it accurately. So you're causing, much less noise for the analyst and still able to detect real insider risk. In addition, there's some things that Exaforce can do to proactively improve reduce the potential for an insider risk. So looking at making sure you have true net permissions. So helping you reduce the permissions that a user has to only what they actually need. And then looking at other configurations like turning on MFA, other things that could help prevent insider risk, especially that last one, the compromised identity. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So here I have looked in Exaforce for some threat findings that are related to an insider risk. And I'm going to go ahead and open up one of these here. And this will take me to an attack chain where I was flagged as an insider risk because I was doing some discovery behavior in AWS, as well as some behavior in Google Workspace that could be seen as malicious. All of this on a VPN. And I'm also, you can see here, if I go into the details, that I'm a high risk identity. And how it knows that is there's two different approaches in Exaforce to do that. You can either give it a business context rule, or you can mark the identity as high risk. And I'll show what a business context rule looks like in a second. All of that context is fed in along with the signals to determine, is this truly a true positive or a benign behavior. So you can see here where the business context rule confirms that I'm not authorized to do security testing. There are others who are, and that I am a high risk user. So the fact that I was doing some discovery behavior on AWS, and I was doing some data exfiltration and other activity in Google Workspace is all summed up here and flagged and chained together. This is really powerful how we're able to make that connection. All the additional analysis across principal, location, session, device, etc., all of that is marked here and with some detailed notes. And I can also dig into each individual alert. So let's go ahead and open up one of these. So in this particular case, it's the Google Workspace one that was chained with that AWS behavior. And so I can see, okay, so from a VPN, there was some data that was removed with a high risk user. And so you can see all the different analysis here. I can also dig into the investigation. So all the details about the events during this session that is automatically brought in, and a detailed analysis about the principal, me, the actor, the actions that were taken. So let's take a look at some of the actions that were taken. So all the different actions were taken here, and I can dig into any of these details. So I can see, okay, data access, authentication, so all the different event details and actions taken. Now, once all of this information is brought together, that's when the Exabots make the analysis and ultimate decision of what the priority is, and is this a false positive or does it need investigation? Now, as an analyst, I could go in here and I could make an ultimate call of saying, okay, I think this is a compromised user, and I can disable their account, reset their Okta, or I can trigger a flow to confirm with the user and their manager that this is normal behavior or malicious behavior. And it's important to not just ask the user, because if they're an insider, of course, they're going to say it's legitimate. So we ask the user and their manager automatically. So this is kind of the reactive things that we can do. Now, one of the other things we can do is look for some behavior, and we make that very simple. You can dig into identities and say, I could do my own threat hunting and investigations from the identities with a visual search or through our Exabot search, and I'll show what that looks like in a second. So let's say I have a suspicion about something about GitHub. So let's look at the GitHub users. And it will automatically filter to all the users who have a GitHub account. And using this visual exploration, I can dig into some events. So maybe I want to see only ones that have, let's say like clone. So I could filter in cloning. Maybe I want to also include, something else like pull request converted to draft, or any of these others. I can dig into some of these other things, like in this case, the workflow created. So let's include that as well. All of the data above is automatically filtered. So now only users who have either done a clone or created a workflow will show up here. So that's a really powerful way to kind of search through users. So I'm going to go ahead and look for myself. All right, so here's my user, and I can expand that and look for that GitHub And here you can see where I've been tagged as high risk. And I can open up, let's open up my GitHub user. And I can see all the different access to repositories, activity heat map, authentication data. And let's just go look at the org roles and permissions. So this is where we could get proactive and say, okay, can I reduce the access that this user has to proactively prevent the damage that would be done by an insider risk? So here you could see I'm a member and it's appropriate. I should be a member, but we could dive deeper and say, okay, these are the organization actions that I haven't used. And so we could reduce the attack surface by reducing that. I can also dig into the repositories and say, okay, these are some of the repositories that I have write access to that I really only need read access to. And so all of that would help me reduce the attack surface by minimizing the amount of permissions that an identity has. So if it gets compromised either by an insider or a compromised identity, it reduces the attack surface. All right, the last thing I wanted to show here is the Exabot search. So let's just say has Taylor in the last 30 days. And with that simple question, Exaforce is automatically going to search across all of my different connected identities to look for this behavior. So you can see here right away all the different identities that it's searching for. And even if there's a user who has a similar name, it would also look at them across their systems. And it's done. Now you can see here that where it's found some critical behavior for insider risk, this is especially heightened by that business context rule. And so all of the details are found. You can see it's a deep, deep investigation, all from a very simple query of, has Taylor shown any insider risk? And with that, that is insider risk in a nutshell. Thanks so much for watching.